Take a look at your shoes right now. Chances are there is a check mark on them. That swoosh is one of the most valuable logos on Earth, worth billions. But did you know that the guy who founded Nike didn't even like it? He paid a college student $35 to draw it and said, "I don't love it, but maybe it will grow on me." Today, we're going to look at how a shy track runner from Oregon built an empire based on a crazy idea, survived a war with the Japanese, and convinced the world that shoes aren't just for walking, they are for winning. This is the history of Nike.
The story starts in 1962. Meet Phil Knight. He isn't a cool CEO. He is a confused 24-year-old who just finished business school and has no idea what to do with his life. He had what he called a crazy idea. Japanese cameras had replaced German cameras in the US market. Could Japanese running shoes do the same to German Adidas? To find out, he did something reckless. He flew to Japan, walked into the office of Onitsuka Tiger, and, well, he lied. He told them he represented a big American distributor called Blue Ribbon Sports. The problem? That company didn't exist. It was just him and his bedroom.
So Phil had the shoes, but he needed legitimacy. Enter Bill Bowerman. If Phil was the brain, Bill was the soul. He was a legendary track coach at the University of Oregon, obsessed with speed. He didn't just train runners, he built them. He would literally tear apart sneakers to make them lighter, believing that shaving off 1 ounce meant cutting seconds off a mile. When Phil showed him the Japanese shoes, Bill didn't just want to buy a pair, he wanted to be a partner. They shook hands. Phil put in $500, Bill put in $500. That $1,000 was the seed capital for what is now a $160 billion company.
Let's be clear, this wasn't an instant success. For years, Phil Knight was living a double life. By day, he was an accountant, working a boring desk job to pay the bills. By night and on weekends, he was selling shoes out of the trunk of his green Plymouth Valiant at track meets. There was no marketing, no Instagram ads, just Phil standing by the track talking to runners. And it worked, because he wasn't a salesman, he was one of them. He spoke their language. Blue Ribbon Sports started growing, selling thousands of Tiger shoes. But success attracts enemies.
While Phil was selling, Bill Bowerman was inventing. One Sunday morning in 1971, Bill was eating breakfast with his wife. He looked at the waffle iron on the table. He looked at the grooves in the metal. And he had an epiphany. If I poured rubber into this, it would make the perfect sole for gripping the track. Most people would just finish their breakfast. Bill Bowerman ruined his wife's waffle iron, pouring toxic melted rubber into it. But it worked. He created the waffle sole. It was lighter, faster, and had better traction than anything on the market. This proved they didn't need Japan to make great shoes. They could do it themselves. Remember Onitsuka Tiger, the Japanese partners? Well, they realized Phil was making too much money. They gave him an ultimatum. Sell your company to us, or we will cut off your supply and bankrupt you. It was a hostile takeover. Phil had a choice, give up or fight. He chose to fight. He secretly started finding new factories to make his own shoes, but he needed a name. His employees threw out ideas like Dimension 6, which is terrible by the way. Finally, one guy suggested Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Phil hated it. He said, "I guess we'll go with it." They slapped that $35 swoosh on the side, broke ties with Onitsuka, and in 1972, Nike was officially born. Okay, fast forward to 1984. Nike is in trouble. They went public, they got rich, and then they got lazy. They totally missed the aerobics craze. Reebok was crushing them because Nike was making shoes for running, not for dancing. Their stock price dropped by 50%. They needed a miracle. They needed a new face. They looked at the NBA draft and saw a rookie named Michael Jordan. But there was a massive problem. Jordan hated Nike. He literally called their shoes cheap and refused to meet with them. He wanted to sign with Adidas. Adidas was the cool brand. Nike was for track nerds. The only reason Jordan even got on the plane to Oregon was because his mother forced him. She told him, "You are going to listen to what they have to say." That motherly advice changed the course of sports history. Nike offered him something unheard of, not just a sponsorship, but his own brand. They threw their entire marketing budget, $500,000 a year, at a kid who hadn't played a single pro game. It was the biggest gamble in corporate history. So they signed Jordan, and they designed the Air Jordan 1, but they make them in bold red and black colors. At the time, the NBA had a strict rule. Sneakers had to be 51% white. These shoes were basically illegal on the court. The NBA sent a letter banning them and threatened to fine Jordan $5,000 every time he stepped onto the court wearing them. Most companies would have panicked and redesigned the shoe. Nike? They saw gold. They told Jordan, "Keep wearing them. We will pay the fines." They turned the punishment into a promotion. They launched a commercial saying, on October 15th, Nike created a revolutionary new basketball shoe. On October 18th, the NBA threw them out of the game. Fortunately, the NBA can't stop you from wearing them. It was pure genius. Suddenly, wearing Jordans wasn't just about basketball, it was an act of rebellion. They hoped to sell $3 million worth of shoes in 4 years. They sold $126 million in the first year alone. By the late 80s, Nike was winning, but they needed a slogan to unite everything, something simple. The ad agency executive, Dan Whedon, was struggling to find the right words. Late one night, he remembered a story about a convicted murderer named Gary Gilmore. In 1977, Gilmore was about to be executed by a firing squad in Utah. When they asked him if he had any last words, he simply looked at the executioners and said, "Let's do it." Dan Whedon liked the raw power of those words, but tweaked them slightly to be more encouraging. He changed it to, "Just do it." Think about how wild that is. The most motivational, life-affirming slogan in the history of advertising. The phrase that inspired millions to run marathons and lose weight was inspired by the final words of a double murderer facing a firing squad. It's dark, but it proves that inspiration can come from the most unlikely places.
But we cannot tell the story of Nike without talking about their darkest chapter. In the 1990s, the curtain was pulled back. Reports started leaking that the factories in Asia making these expensive sneakers were actually sweatshops. We are talking about terrible conditions, child labor, hazardous fumes, and wages as low as 14 cents an hour. A famous photo was published in Life magazine showing a 12-year-old Pakistani boy sewing a Nike soccer ball. The public outrage was instant. Protests erupted at the Olympics. College students refused to wear Nike. The brand became a symbol of corporate greed. Phil Knight was in denial at first, but eventually he realized this would kill the company. In 1998, he gave a famous speech admitting the Nike product has become synonymous with slave wages, forced overtime, and arbitrary abuse. It took them a decade to clean up their supply chain, and while they aren't perfect today, they were forced to become leaders in transparency just to survive. Even giants make mistakes, and Nike's biggest modern mistake has a name: Kanye West. Before Yeezy was with Adidas, he was with Nike. They released the Air Yeezy 1 and 2, and the hype was astronomical. People were camping out for weeks. But Kanye wanted more. He wanted royalties, a percentage of every shoe sold, just like Michael Jordan. Nike looked at him and said, "No, you aren't an athlete. We don't give royalties to rappers." It was pure arrogance. They underestimated his influence. Kanye got mad, walked away, and signed with Adidas, who gave him everything he wanted. The result? Adidas Yeezy became a billion-dollar brand almost overnight, making Adidas cool again for a whole new generation. Nike lost arguably the biggest cultural icon of the 21st century because they were too stubborn to change their old rules. Today, Nike isn't really just a shoe company anymore. They figured out how to gamify shopping. They created the drop culture.
By intentionally making fewer shoes than people want, they create artificial scarcity. When a new Travis Scott Nike drops on the SNKRS app, it's basically a lottery. You have thousands of people trying to buy a $150 shoe that they can immediately flip on StockX for $1,000. Nike turns sneakers into a tradable asset like gold or stocks. This created a cult of sneakerheads who don't even wear the shoes. They collect them in boxes like art. It's brilliant because it keeps the brand hyped without Nike having to spend money on traditional TV ads. The customers do the marketing for them by showing off their W's, wins, on social media.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into the sneaker world, don't just sit there, just do it. Smash that like button. It really helps the algorithm find other business nerds like us. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next breakdown. And if you want to know how Steve Jobs turned a garage startup into a $3 trillion cult, click the video appearing on your screen right now. It's even wilder than the Nike story. I'll see you there.